friends, and welcome back to Ghouls Night In, the spooky chat show with your best ghoul friends. I'm Penny Snark.
And I'm Midge Munster. And Penny, we just had St. Patrick's Day,
We
and
did.
I I really I love Irish culture. They're a very spiritual and superstitious people. And of course I think a lot of us when we think of Irish folklore, we think of especially like around St. Pat's, we're thinking about leprechauns, right?
Of course.
However, there are lots of monsters and creatures in Irish folklore, and one in particular that has always been really interesting to me is the Banshee. And so
Ooh.
today we are going to talk a little bit more about her history and where she comes from and why she be screaming all day.
Yeah, she be yelling.
She be yelling, yeah. One thing we know about the Banshee for sure, she's gonna be yelling.
Yep.
So there are lots of representations of banshees in pop culture now.
Mhm.
Some specifically that come to mind to me are like I know on Teen Wolf there's a whole. I actually don't watch Teen Wolf, but I am familiar with the fact that there's a whole storyline revolving around banshees.
All right.
And there's comic book characters that are banshee that have a big um,
Big ah.
a big There's lots of horror movies that feature kind of like scary banshees, but
Yes.
as a do you have any specific banshees that come to mind at all?
Oh, I feel like I'm picturing like a Scooby Doo banshee.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there was
I
one.
That's what immediately what came to mind when you
No,
said
I think
banshee.
you're right. I didn't even
Yeah.
think of that, but I absolutely think you're correct.
Yeah, I
Um
would say I'm definitely most familiar with them being treated as like a horror figure.
Right. So, but originally they are not an evil or scary spirit. In fact, they're not really a spirit at all.
Oh.
So, going back as far as the 8th century in Ireland, the word banshee actually comes from the etymology is banshee, which,
Hmm.
uh,
Yeah.
pretty simple there, but the meaning translates to fairy woman or woman of the other world.
Ooh.
Um, there's a lot of this was really interesting to kind of look back at because of course, different scholars and people from different backgrounds religiously and places and things have translated this word a variety of ways um, from the woman of the hills to woman of peace to lady of death
Ooh.
to Angel of Death, much more Anglo-Saxon Christian interpretation,
Yes.
the White Lady of Sorrow, the Nymph of the Air, or the Spirit of the Air. So she can be many, many things, but by Irish etymology, their culture, she is a fae or fairy creature rather than a spirit.
All right.
And which also to me just makes her like cute. I'm like,
See, I was gonna
oh.
say Fate can be scary.
Well, the Fae, yeah, you don't want to
They
mess
are
with the
often
Fae. That's
scary.
true. That's true. But there is much like a lot of different interpretations of the name Banshee, there are a lot of debates about what the Banshee is and what she looks like. She is either depicted as a maiden of sorts or a crone, depending on who you
Mhm.
ask. Sometimes she is a fair, kind of like virginal young woman with like all white, or sometimes in a green cloak with long red hair and a gaunt, kind of hollow face. And in some of these interpretations, she is like otherworldly tall, like very big, big lady.
Nice.
uh, but then other times she is a fairy, so she's very small. And this interpretation is often paired with her being kind of an elderly woman, being kind of
Mhm.
hunched and tiny, and being dressed in all black and having white, crazy hair.
Yeah, I
Uh,
feel like I think when I if I close my eyes and I'm like, "What's a banshee?" I think of, like, an old lady with a bunch of crazy white hair.
and fun fact, and we'll get into that, there's a reason that you think that.
Ooh.
Uh, but one thing that we can all agree upon in all these studies is that Banshee is always a female figure. She's always a woman, and she is seen as a marker of death to come. And while that might sound like a bad thing, it was not necessarily culturally viewed as such always. So,
Hmm.
one explanation, kind of as to the variety in her appearance, could actually be that there are different banshees and different types of banshee. And something I learned through this is that they were specifically associated with specific families. So the presence of a banshee was directly correlated to nobility, to Gaelic nobility, and families who had ancestral heritage in the
Mhm.
land of Ireland. So families would have like their own personal banshee. um and some of
Bougie.
them like, yeah, and get your own banshee, that's how you know you've made it.
Yes.
But a lot of them would have, I mean, their banshee would have like her own name. And they were really associated with families who had surnames with O or Mick slash Mac names, because that surname is like son of, like O'Brien is
Yeah.
son of Brian. And so that would denote that those families had ancestral history on those lands. Um, and that being said, stories of banshees showing up kind of started to disappear in the 16th and 17th centuries. And this is kind of believed to be because at that point, the British started taking over Irish lands and taking ancestral lands from Irish families. And while the banshees were associated with that specific land, the British people living there didn't have any ancestral claim, and therefore, like, you don't get a banshee because you're not
Mhm.
Irish.
Yeah.
Um, there are a few specific banshees that are referenced in writing. Writer Thomas Crafton Crocker referred to the Bunworth Banshee. This is Mount all over again from the
Yep.
Mount Everest episode. I'm saying Banshee to me, Miss Banshee.
Miss
That's
Banshee.
Bunworth Banshee, and the McCarthy Banshee were two specifics that were noted in his writing his book Irish Folklore. And in both stories, these banshees were present, to denote the passing or the about to pass of the male heir of the family, and that their deaths were preceded by wailing and clapping from the banshee, which I know that like clapping in his means like more of a knocking or a rapping.
Yeah. Just
But I'm just
round of
picturing
applause.
I'm just picturing
"You're
her like,
gonna die. Woo!
yes, you did it,
Yeah."
death, yeah. um but yeah, so again, we can all agree her appearance is a warning of death. But why the screaming? Why the moaning? I think most people, when they think banshee, they think of the band. Like, or I even, I mean, I don't know if you had this, but growing up, I would hear people say like, "Oh, she was like screaming like a banshee."
Oh, yeah. I
So
am
that's like kind of
familiar.
a an association for sure. And this comes from a historical funeral practice. Much like a lot of Asian cultures have funeral wailing as an
Mhm.
expression of mourning and grief, Irish culture has a similar practice, but it specifically revolves around women, and they were central to the practice. Um, it all kind of stems back to a Celtic battle goddess who, was, I hope I say this right, Katabadva was her name, and her presence was to signify the death of like a prominent warrior on a battlefield, and she would do that by letting out like a loud wail or cry, and
Mhm.
that's how you knew someone was about to die. So this kind of ends up translating into this practice called keening. And keening in Irish funeral culture was a loud and like rhythmic performative crying,
Mm-hmm.
specifically performed by professionals. These keening women were an integral part of the passing of a spirit. It was believed that they were part of the, you know, they helped the spirit pass from this world into the other world, and that they were necessary for the soul to pass on. They were really respected and like hired professionals that would come into your home and lead the mourners through grief by leading in very loud crying and
Mm-hmm.
singing also.
Very
And
cool. Like a funeral choir master.
yeah, yeah. The director of the
Yes.
funeral crying.
Like we're all gonna
Um
wail now.
3, 2, 1. Ah. Uh so, and interestingly, sometimes banshees are also called Queensha. uh, Gaelic is so hard.
It, it yeah.
I looked up. I had to look up like really broken down pronunciations of some of these words because I was like, "What does that say?" But that translates to keening woman. Um, and this is kind of where we get into the idea, the appearances of a banshee. So, because keening women professionally were seen as such a necessary part of the passing process, they were kind of given a lot of leeway where social norms were concerned. And they were seen as kind of these almost supernatural beings, even though they were human women. Like they were seen as kind of having one foot in the other world versus
Mm.
here. And so they kind of lived outside society. They would like be traveling barefoot through fields in the countryside, and they would wear like tattered, crazy clothes, and their hair would be all like wild and not combed. And this was actually part of the practice almost because the
Yeah.
appearance like solidified their connection to the otherworldly. Like they looked like they were not of this,
Yeah.
construct. So now, on days where I'm just like not feeling it, I'm just gonna be like, I'm actually otherworldly.
Yes.
I'm feeling otherworldly today.
I know. I'm like, I feel like I want to read a novel about the lives
Yeah,
of keening women. I wonder. I'm sure that exists somewhere. I'll have to
probably.
Google
Yeah.
it.
Uh, Even like I would love. I want a fantasy novel about a keening
Yeah.
lady.
Yes.
But yeah, the very Giving Woods Witch, like very crazy
Right? Like, hell yeah,
running
girl.
through the woods. I,
Come
I
get
also
that.
I kept picturing Elizabeth Bennet for some reason. Blood up
Yeah.
her hem, like running through the countryside. Um, but yeah, I mean, like I mentioned earlier, you'll note that that appearance is very much what we would think of when thinking of a banshee
Mm.
as a spirit. Is that kind of crazed, wild, floating through a field, big hair, and it's sometimes believed that a banshee is the spirit of a woman who didn't fully carry out her keening duties in life and therefore is like doomed to do it
Oh yeah.
in
Forced to
her
keen
spiritual realm.
forever.
Lost a keen. Um, but again, could be, could not be. There's a lot of theories. I did read a really interesting account of an Irish woman who kind of talked about her family's interpretation. They apparently her family had their very own banshee, and they her family the story was basically that the because also sometimes people say that they hear the banshee singing, which again was part of the keening practice, so could
Hmm.
absolutely be part of it. But this woman said that her family told her the banshee sings with the voice of the music of the angels, but only to the person who's about to die. So to other people, it sounds like a scream.
Oh.
And then when the banshee appears to the person who's about to die, she's like the young maiden. She's beautiful. She has all the like pretty hair. Uh, but to the people who are not about to die, who that she's more of a warning to, that she's the like tangled mess, crazy
Yeah.
leaves and twigs, scary face. And that I thought that was really interesting because it kind of, again, the idea of the banshee is not necessarily scary inherently. And so I did like this, that she's almost a comforting presence to those about to go. And so
Yeah.
even though she is like a warning, she's also like, it's gonna be okay. I'm gonna help you through it.
Yeah,
You
she's a
know,
guide.
she's a guide, which is, yeah, kind of more, very, very fairy of her. um, there's also a lot of references to her being seen combing her hair, um, which I couldn't find a lot of information about why that like specifically would be important. Um, but the hair was a big deal. uh like in a lot of the stuff, and so I don't know, I think maybe just like because that like it's such an inherently kind of feminine,
Yeah.
practice or so, I don't know, but I think that it's very cool that women are so like tied in to the Irish death practices, and that they were seen as kind of this help for passage.
Yeah, I mean,
uh
I don't know if there's actual connections, but it just makes me think of like midwives and kind of their
yeah,
sort of
like
like
they're there to help with the beginning of the life.
yeah, and like also, women who historically have kind of lived outside of social norms and sort of the idea of being like
Hmm.
this kind of guide of life. And then you also have kind of like this keening woman or potentially a banshee who's like your guide into death.
That's a really good parallel. There was also, I think it was Scottish, the banshee, the name. I don't think I forgot to write it down, but it literally like translates to like little washerwoman. And there's all these accounts of like the midnight washerwomen, or like the little washerwomen, and
Oh,
they
I love
would
that.
but it was directly correlated to the idea of the death shroud,
Mhm.
and that they were like washing the death shroud. And But I just love the idea of like a tiny little woman
Right?
with her little
The
washboard being like, "You're gonna die up there.
time to die.
Time to
Uh,
go."
that's I don't know, I feel like that's such a good, kind of, like, representation of, like, the mundanity of death and just, like, you
Mm-hmm.
kind of say, like, it's something that comes for us all, so it's kind of like, "Yep, this is just a thing, just like washing your clothes, one day you're gonna die."
Death, taxes, and little washerwomen.
Yep, little washerwoman. Maybe the little washerwoman can help me do my taxes too.
No, please, please, washerwoman. It's that time of year. uh, so kind of as I like to always kind of look into, what could this actually be if
Yeah.
it's not, spiritual realm. And I didn't touch too much on this, but of course also there's, the whole aspect that these there was one gentleman who had a kind of a study about this that I read, talking about how there's some people who believe that the like banshee and all these other creatures were like ancient pagan Irish gods who were driven out by the rise of Christianity. And then I thought, I don't know, this made me giggle. Like, literally became smaller and smaller because less and less people believed in them, and so
Mhm.
then they became like fairies. Like they became the fae because they were like old big gods, and now they're tiny fae. um and so there, because this is not like a ghost, I would say it is not our place to say whether or not it exists,
Yeah.
because I am not culturally Irish or pagan, so I don't know.
Mhm.
But if it were to be quote explained in a like highly rational way, a lot of people believe that this could be the screech of a barn owl. They are like, I don't know if they're technically like endangered in Ireland now, but they don't. There's not very many in Ireland
Yeah.
these days. But way back when, there were a lot, and that would almost kind of as well tie into, several centuries later, we stopped hearing about banshees. Maybe as the population of these owls decreased in that area, we're hearing less and less shrieks, and therefore the Banshee rumors kind of fade into
Mhm.
nothingness.
Yeah.
But
Owls
it
do
would
sound pretty
they
spooky.
they do be yelling.
They do be they
Um,
owls also be yelling, so
yeah, exactly. But yeah, and they're nocturnal. The screams would
Mhm.
likely be at night. Banshees pretty exclusively are seen at night. They're not daytime shriekers.
Not daytime ladies.
Yeah, they are not morning people. Um, and so it is possible that maybe somebody heard the shriek of an owl preceding the death of a family member, and that this kind of became like, oh, that it's the keening shrieks of the other world, you know.
Mhm.
But I, yeah, I don't. I totally lost my train of thought just then, but I do. I don't know. I like to believe in folklore. Oh, and that also wouldn't explain the many accounts of very very specifically people say like there's multiple people who like wrote about it in firsthand experience, and that like the woman would come and press her face up against the window, like they would pull back the
Ooh.
curtains and there was a lady with her face pressed up against the window and she would scream. um so that definitely isn't an owl.
No, probably no, most likely not.
um so who knows. I wish this is one of the few times I wish I could get haunted, question mark. I don't know if it's a haunting, but I would love to see a banshee. I think this sounds cool. uh,
It
I
seems
will
like a
say,
very it's a useful kind of offering to the world to be like, "Hey, watch out. This guy's about to
yeah,
die."
yeah, gets everybody prepped. um as a not necessarily related to this, like the history specifically, um the reason I initially kind of got interested in this, there's actually a local band to Kansas City, the Elders, who have that the family is Irish,
Mhm.
and they have like, I mean, and not like how white people are like, I'm Irish. Like they are from
They're
Ireland. They
from Ireland,
immigrated to
yeah.
the United States from Ireland. um and one of the members, he has done some solo work, and he wrote a song about his father's passing, and about how he like uh it's about the Banshee legend, and like how that he correlates that with like his father's death. And it's a really haunting, like beautiful song, and they use the electric guitar to like emulate the sound of the banshee wailing, and it's really cool. So that musical piece like changed my brain chemistry forever and got me very interested in this legend. So check out Kian Byrne. Great musician.
And there's
And
I
huh?
didn't oh, sorry, you may be about
No,
to say this.
no, go. I'm not.
Oh, there's a movie, a Banshee. I don't know if it's about banshees,
Bench
but there's a movie
the
with
Banshee
Banshee
of
in the title
Inish.
that was up for Oscars,
Yeah,
wasn't
Banshee,
it?
is it Inishire? Banshee's
Yeah,
Inishire?
in Inisherin?
Or yeah, Inisherin. um Yeah, I actually don't know. I mean, I'm assuming it has probably something to do with a story about a death or something. I actually
Yeah,
don't know.
yeah,
I have not seen
I'm
it.
guessing it's not like a literal banshee, but I was just like, "Oh, hey,
It's been, yeah, it's been in the news.
it's been in the news."
Well, and that's the Surfer Jets, the band I really like, a all lady surf rock band. Can't recommend enough. Plus, their name is the Surfer Jets, which is so funny.
That's very good.
Their like Halloween single they released last year is called the Banshee Bop, and it's also like a very cool. Again, using guitars to kind of mimic that like shrieking sound. So, uh, check. I'm just plugging musicians now because I think.
Hey.
I assume if you're listening to this podcast that you would think music about banshees is also cool.
Based on a quick Google, the movie is also about a musician, so there you go.
Well, here we are. I guess also though, again, they were banshees are associated with singing too, so maybe there's kind of a tie there into like why they would be kind of also associated with music and musicians and a lot of
Yeah.
music about them. But anyway, that's all.
That's
I
all.
that's all, folks. I was excited to get to chat about this. I hope that it was interesting to you. If you are a person of direct Irish descent and you have a story about your own family banshee, I would be fascinated to hear more. Uh, if not, then I guess you're British. Sorry about you. You don't get a banshee.
You don't get one.
None for you. If you are enjoying listening to this podcast, we really appreciate it if you consider leaving us a rating or a review wherever you listen to us. That really helps us find new listeners and know what kind of topics you like hearing about. And we do like to read those reviews here on the show, and I believe Penny's got one for us today.
I do. This 5-star review comes from Remy Rat and is titled Dedicated Listener.
But
Like being dead.
ah ah
um,
ah.
as a horror spooky things enthusiast, sometimes it feels like I see the same themes and stories over and over, but Ghouls Night In always manages to find new and interesting topics for me to learn about. Not to mention, listening in feels like I'm hanging out with a few ghoul friends. 5 stars. Thank you, friend.
Woo! Thank you, Remy. And I mean, that means you and I only each get 2.5 stars today instead of five, but
I
that's
guess we
fine.
can. I
That's
guess we
fine
can
today.
share if we have to.
We'll share stars. And if you would like to see more from us, you can follow our podcast over on Instagram at Ghouls Night in Pod. And if you're looking for me, you can find me across all platforms at Midge Munster.
And you can find me at Penny Snark.
And that's all for today. Until next time,
Good.
good.